How do you get to know a place? A place like Tucson. A place like the Southwest Borderlands. How do you get to know what life is like there? What makes the authentic experience? Those are hard questions to ask about the present, let alone the past. To get answers, you have to visit a library or dive into an archive and look for glimpses of an earlier reality. Many of these artifacts represent a mythic West.
It's Main Street in Tucson, Arizona, where horses and riders are just as common a sight as the automobiles.
This is literally not true. In 1950, when Charles and Lucille Herbert shot this film, horseback riders were not as common as cars in Tucson. But the film was selling Tucson and continuing a Western myth. But amidst the myth, in some cases, there's a wealth of historical detail. Street scenes of downtown Tucson, a visual record of San Javier, information about how people farmed in the desert. This is what makes the films of Charles and Lucille Herbert so interesting. This is what makes myth so interesting.
Mr. Ted DeGrazia is the originator, and on his Ramada, under the bright Arizona sun, he paints the bold, colorful patterns with special textile paints.
Charles and Lucille Herbert were two young people who met on the East Coast and wanted to get out of there. In the late 30s, settled in Tucson. They decided that it was a great place, the sunshine was wonderful, and started making these little films, 10-minute films about the Borderlands and the Southwest and different stories of interest.
Here's an unusual saguaro, or giant cacti, a freak. It's like a cauliflower. And another, the only one of its kind known. This is called a watermelon cactus. Why it grew that way, no one knows.
From 36 to 76, they worked in still photography, moving image, aerial photography. They used to call him a one-man chamber of commerce. And he kind of was. He wanted to promote everything possible about the Southwest. And it wasn't so much to get rich as it was just to share this amazing region with the rest of the world. One of the pieces that caught his eye very early on was down at Fort Huachuca, where, of course, there were the Buffalo Soldiers who had been there since after the Civil War, and they discovered that there was this last group of Apache scouts who were working on post and living on post. So already that was a formula for pretty interesting intercultural stories and photography. And it's not that they didn't capitalize on the sort of Wild West and the Indians, but their work was much more sensitive about depicting people.
South to Sonora, down Mexico way. Yes, it's true. There is an amazing change going on down here, but you have to see it to believe it.
What's interesting about the Herberts' work and why I think it's important to know about is that they actually talked to the people who had names and were allowed to look directly into the camera and speak for themselves.
Few Western mythmakers were as sensitive or grounded as the Herberts. In fact, most Western myths were fabricated from little more than a few particles of reality, a lot of imagination, and the cultural attitudes of their creators, whether pulp novels, Hollywood films, or tourist brochures. But even the most realistic myths can be explored for their agendas, often by looking at what they chose to omit, or who.
The representations are not harmless. They're representing this process of settler colonialism.
So off we go, starting here at the picturesque Rancho Grande in South to Sonora for a thrilling adventure, seeing some of the oldest and most interesting spots on this continent. We cross the international boundary line at Nogales, Arizona.
Tourists coming to Tucson in the 20th century were invited through these productions. Go to Mexico and you'll have a great time there. You can have Mexican food. But tourists could have gone anywhere in Tucson and had Mexican food and had mariachis and had Mexican music. But that wasn't evident from the cultural productions.
Real Mexican music.
Making Tucson a gateway to Mexico was really important because that was instituting a border. So the message is that one time there were Mexicans there, but they're no longer there. So it's still that narrative of the vanishing indigenous people. Mexicans lived on that side of the border, and Mexicans did not live on this side of the border.
After you've made your purchases on your way home, you check your loot at the U.S. Customs.
Does this land have a history? No, it's empty. Does it have a previous owner? No, nobody owns it. All of a sudden you get these buildings, you get these resorts, you get the city, and you don't see Mexican labor, indigenous labor. There's no resentment, there's no hostility, and there's no message that they are angry that they lost their land. These myths are really important because it informs people what is the frontier, what is civilization, what is modernity, what is not modern, who's American, who's not American, who belongs, who doesn't belong. The myth then substantiates not asking questions.
One thing that exemplifies this juxtaposition of myth and reality are the Hollywood posters, the treatment of the savage Indian. One of them is specifically of Geronimo, it looks like him ready to strike, and it's this big and bold and colorful poster. And then we have the photographs that are black and white. His look is serene. He's just been captured by the cavalry. And in a way, you kind of think about what he's feeling at that moment, what that picture is going to say to his people, and how the cavalry wants him to look to the world. So it's very complicated. We found that there's some gray there between myth and reality, and that we need to really understand both.
Sun and sand, sagebrush and tumbleweed, rolling mountains and giant cactus. This is the old Santa Cruz Trail, running from Santa Cruz in Old Mexico to Tucson.
However you look at myth and reality, it's clear that they're deeply intertwined. Myths may draw upon bits of reality as inspiration, but they also shape how we understand and act upon the world. Even old Hollywood films, pulp novels, and tourist material, which look like pure fantasy today, still inform how we live in the Southwest Borderlands. But there are countless ways to get a little closer to the reality of the past, from government documents to employee petitions to personal correspondence. Photographs from regular people show a far more diverse and less glamorous world than the mythic Southwest of seemingly incessant gun battles. Yet our deepest understandings of the past come from looking at myths and realities together and coming up with our own interpretations. And you can do just that at this exhibit.